The left knee had been giving me trouble since before Thanksgiving, and my doctor told me I had no business sitting in a car for more than 2 hours at a stretch. I told him the same thing I told him when he said I should stop working the ranch at 64. I appreciated his concern, and I would take it under advisement. That was my way of saying no. It was the morning of December 22nd when I loaded a small overnight bag into the back of my truck, fed the horses, and told my neighbor Carl to check on the place while I was gone. Carl is 71 and walks with a cane, so I wasn't entirely confident in this arrangement. But Carl has been my neighbor for 31 years, and he has never let me down yet. I had driven this stretch of highway between Amarillo and Dallas more times than I could count. I knew where the good coffee was. I knew which rest stops had decent facilities. And I knew the exact mile marker where the radio signal for my favorite AM station finally cut out. It was a familiar road. But familiarity doesn't make 4 hours comfortable when your knee is swollen and the heater in the truck blows cold for the first 40 minutes before it decides to cooperate. I drove anyway. I always drove anyway. My son Daniel had called me 3 weeks earlier to tell me that he and his wife Rebecca had found a new house. A big house, he said. In a good neighborhood, he said. And they were having a small gathering before Christmas, just close family and a few of their friends, to show the place off a little. He invited me. He used the word invited like it was something generous, like it was a gift he was offering me. I remember thinking that was a strange way for a son to speak to his father, but I let it pass. I had been letting things pass with Daniel for a long time. What I had not told Daniel, not in several years now, was the full picture of what I had built. He knew I owned the ranch. He knew I had a few investments. He knew I had done well enough over the decades to never worry about money, which he interpreted as comfortable. What he did not know, because I had never seen a reason to tell him, was that the ranch alone sat on land appraised at over $40 million. He did not know about the mineral rights I had quietly acquired across 3 counties in the 90s when nobody thought natural gas was going to be worth anything. He did not know about the portfolio my accountant managed, which had grown to something that made even my accountant occasionally call just to confirm I understood the numbers. I drove an old truck. I wore worn boots. I bought my jeans at the same Western wear store I had been going to since Daniel was in high school. None of this was performance. It was just who I was. Money had never changed the way I wanted to live, and I saw no reason to advertise it. The drive took 4 hours and 20 minutes, which was about right for a Tuesday morning. I pulled off the highway and followed the address. Daniel had texted me into a neighborhood I had never visited. The houses got bigger as I drove in, the lawns more manicured, the driveways longer. I found the address and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at it. It was a large colonial-style home, cream exterior, black shutters, a 3-car garage. There was already a row of cars parked along the curved driveway. Nice cars. I noticed a white Range Rover and a silver Mercedes, and what looked like a BMW SUV in a deep navy blue. My truck looked like it had wandered in from a different planet. I stepped out slowly, worked the stiffness out of my knee, and walked to the front door. I could hear voices and music inside. I rang the bell. The woman who opened the door was not Rebecca. She was a woman I didn't recognize, probably one of the catering staff from the look of her apron, and she smiled politely and told me to come in. I thanked her and stepped inside. The entry hall alone was bigger than my living room. There were flowers arranged on a side table that probably cost more than a week of groceries. The walls had the look of fresh paint and new art, the kind of art that coordinates with the furniture rather than meaning anything. I stood there for a moment, holding my overnight bag, taking it in. That was when I heard the voices from the room just to the left of the entry, separated from me by a partially open door. I was not trying to listen. I want to be clear about that. I was simply standing there, just arrived, bag in hand, not yet announced, and the voices were not quiet. He actually drove that truck here. Rebecca's voice. I recognized it immediately. I saw it pull up on the camera. There was laughter. More than one person. What did you expect? A man's voice I didn't recognize. Daniel said, he's been driving that same truck for 15 years. It's embarrassing. Rebecca again. I've told Daniel 100 times, if he's going to come to things like this, at least we could buy him a decent vehicle. Something that doesn't look like it belongs on a work site. Does he know people here tonight? A woman's voice. Also unfamiliar. A couple of Daniel's old colleagues are coming. And the Harmons. Richard Harmon just closed a deal worth about 90 million, so... A pause. I just hope he doesn't try to talk to them about cattle prices or whatever it is he talks about. More laughter. He means well, said a third voice. And I recognized that one too. My son, standing in that room, saying nothing else. Just, he means well. 2 words that covered and dismissed 37 years of everything I had ever done for him. I stood in the hallway for a long moment. My knee ached. My bag was getting heavy. The music from deeper in the house played something soft and instrumental, designed to suggest elegance. I thought about walking in. I thought about the look on Rebecca's face. I thought about a lot of things in those few seconds. Then I set my bag quietly against the wall, turned around, and walked back out the front door. The woman in the apron called something after me. I didn't stop. I sat in my truck for a while in the dark, at the end of the street, away from the house. The heater was finally working by then. I watched the Christmas lights on the neighboring houses blink in their slow, cheerful rhythms. I was not angry. Exactly. Anger is hot and quick. What I felt was something quieter and older. The kind of feeling that settles in when something you suspected for a long time turns out to be true. I had built something over 40 years of early mornings and late nights, and decisions that cost me sleep and sometimes cost me more than sleep. I had built it quietly, without asking anyone for admiration, because that was the way I was raised, and because I genuinely did not need admiration to keep going. And in building it quietly, I had apparently allowed my son and his wife to construct an entirely false picture of who I was, a picture in which I was something to be managed, something faintly embarrassing, a father who meant well. I called my granddaughter. Lily was 23 and worked in Charlotte, and she was Daniel's daughter from his first marriage, which meant she occupied a particular kind of awkward position in the family geography. Rebecca had never warmed to her. Daniel, to his credit, loved her, but he was not always good at showing it in ways that cost him anything. Lily picked up on the second ring. Pa. Her voice was warm and immediate. Are you there? How was the drive? Drive was fine, I said. Are you coming down for Christmas? I'm supposed to be there on the 24th. Why? What's wrong? I told her I just wanted to hear her voice. She didn't fully believe me, because Lily has always been sharp, but she let it go. We talked for 20 minutes about her job and a man she was seeing and a book she had just finished. By the time I hung up, I felt steadier. I found a hotel about 3 miles from Daniel's house. Nothing fancy, but clean and quiet. I checked in, took something for my knee, and sat on the edge of the bed thinking. I thought about what I actually wanted. Not what I was owed, not what would feel satisfying for 5 minutes and regrettable for years. What I actually wanted. What I wanted was for Daniel to understand what he had, before it was too late for either of us. And I thought about the Harmons, Richard Harmon, who had just closed a $90 million deal. I knew that name. I knew it because one of the investment groups I had quietly participated in over the last decade had done a project with Harmon's development company. I had never met the man, but my attorney had dealt with his attorney on 2 separate occasions and the reports had been favorable. I pulled out my phone and made a call that I probably should have made 3 years earlier. My attorney, whose name is Gerald and who has been managing my affairs for over 2 decades, picked up despite the late hour because that was the kind of attorney Gerald was. I need you to do something for me before Friday, I said. We talked for 30 minutes. The next morning, I drove back to Daniel's house. The party cars were gone. I rang the bell and Rebecca answered, and her expression went through several stages in about 2 seconds. Surprise, a quick recalibration, and then a careful smile. Frank, she said, we didn't see you last night. Did something happen? I got turned around, I said. Long drive. I found a hotel. Hope that's all right. She said, of course, come in, let me get Daniel. She was gracious in the way people are gracious when they are uncertain how much you know. Daniel came downstairs, still in a robe, and he hugged me, and he looked genuinely glad to see me. And this was the complicated part of all of it. My son was not a bad person. He was a person who had made a series of small surrenders over the years, each one reasonable seeming in isolation, until he had surrendered enough that he could stand in a room and hear his wife mock his father and say only 2 words. But he was still my son. He still had the same hands as my father. He still laughed at the same kinds of things I laughed at. There was still something real between us. I stayed for breakfast. We talked about the house, which was genuinely beautiful and which I told him so. Rebecca was warmer than I expected. Their younger boy, Cooper, who was 8, showed me his room and a complicated Lego set he was building, and I sat on the floor with him for 20 minutes, figuring out a section he had gotten wrong, and that was the best 20 minutes of the entire trip. I did not tell Daniel what I had heard. I did not tell him what I had set in motion either. The Christmas Eve dinner was held at the same house. Rebecca had organized it as something between a family dinner and another social event. The Harmons were there, which I understood to be a point of some importance to her. Richard Harmon was a tall man in his mid-50s, with an easy confidence and a firm handshake. He introduced himself to me near the fireplace, and I told him my name, and I watched his expression change. "Frank Caldwell?" he said. "That's right." He looked at me for a moment, then looked at my boots, then looked back at my face. "I didn't realize," he said slowly, "that you were Daniel's father." "He doesn't talk about me much," I said, and I kept my voice easy so it didn't land hard. Richard Harmon had done his homework by then, or Gerald had helped him do it, because Richard knew what my name was attached to. He knew about the land and the mineral rights and the portfolio. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to understand that the man standing in front of him in worn boots had a different story than the one he had been given. We talked for about 40 minutes. We talked about development and land use and a project he was considering in the Texas Panhandle. I told him I had some thoughts on that region. He said he would very much like to hear them. Rebecca noticed. I watched it happen from across the room. She was speaking with one of her friends, and she glanced over, and she saw Richard Harmon leaning toward me with the particular body language of a man who has realized he is talking to someone important. She went still for just a moment. Then she said something to her friend and began moving in our direction. By the time she arrived, Richard was saying, "Gerald told me you've been looking at the Carson Ridge property. That's actually something I'd love to discuss with your people." Rebecca stood just outside our conversation, holding a glass of wine, and her face was doing something careful and complicated. "Rebecca," Richard said, turning to include her, "you didn't tell me your father-in-law was Frank Caldwell." She said, and stopped. "I didn't realize you two knew each other." "We didn't," Richard said pleasantly. "We do now." Daniel had come over by this point, drawn by some instinct, and he was looking between Richard and me with an expression I recognized from when he was a teenager and had come home to find that I already knew whatever it was he was about to explain. "Dad," he said carefully, "do you know Richard?" "We were just getting acquainted," I said. "He's been talking about the Panhandle project. I told him I might have some acreage that could be relevant." There was a silence that had a very specific texture to it. I had not planned a dramatic scene. I want to be clear about that too. I had not arranged for an audience or prepared a speech. What I had done was make a phone call to Gerald and ask him to make sure that Richard Harmon knew who I was before this dinner. That was all. The rest of it unfolded because when you spend decades building something quietly, the truth has a way of asserting itself when the conditions are right. Rebecca said, with some effort at lightness, "I didn't know you were involved in development, Frank." "I'm mostly on the land side," I said. "Gerald handles most of it." "Gerald," she repeated. "My attorney. Gerald Marsh. You may have heard the name." Richard Harmon, who was a perceptive man, excused himself to get another drink. He was giving us space, which was either kindness or good social instincts. Probably both. Daniel looked at his wife, and then at me, and I could see something working behind his eyes. "Dad," he said again. But this time he said it differently. Slower, like he was hearing the word for the first time in a while. I didn't make a speech. I didn't tell him what I had heard from the hallway. Not then. Not in front of his guests. Some things are not for audiences. What I did do was go find Cooper, who had fallen asleep on a couch in the sitting room with his tablet on his chest, and I sat next to him for a while in the quiet, and I thought about the things that actually mattered. Lily arrived on Christmas morning, driving up in her sensible used Honda, and she came through the door and went straight to me and hugged me before she said hello to anyone else, and over her shoulder I could see Rebecca watching this with a new set of eyes. I had asked Gerald to draw up some paperwork, which he had done overnight because that was the kind of attorney he was. I was not disinheriting Daniel. I was not punishing anyone. What I was doing was making things clear in a way they had never been made clear before, because I had apparently done my family a disservice by letting them guess at things rather than knowing them. The trust I had established put the ranch and the primary assets in a structure that protected them. It named Lily as a co-trustee alongside Daniel. It established a portion for Cooper's education that was unconditional, and it made explicit, in the dry language that Gerald preferred, what the rough shape of the estate looked like, not as a threat, not as a reward, just as information, the kind of information that, in hindsight, I should have shared years earlier. I gave Daniel the documents on Christmas morning, privately, in the kitchen while the others were still waking up. I handed him the folder and I watched him read the first page. I watched his face go through its changes. He put the folder down after a few minutes. He didn't say anything for a long moment. "I didn't know," he said finally. "I know you didn't. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because the money was never the point," I said. "So I never made it the point. But I think that was a mistake. I think you built a picture of me that wasn't accurate, and I let that happen." He was quiet again. "I heard what was said before the party," I said. "When I came in, I heard it and I left, and I got a hotel room, and I thought about what I wanted to do about it. I looked at my son. I don't want an apology from Rebecca. I don't need one. What I want is for you to decide what kind of man you're going to be. Not for me, for yourself, for Cooper." Daniel's jaw was tight. I could see the effort it took for him to hold himself together. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. And he meant it. I could tell the difference between the sorry that is just a word and the sorry that costs something. "I know," I said. "Don't be sorry to me. Do better." I left after breakfast. I said goodbye to Cooper, who made me promise to video call him so he could show me the next section of the Lego project. I said goodbye to Lily, who held on a beat longer than necessary and looked at me with those sharp eyes and said quietly, "You okay, Pa?" And I told her I was better than okay, and that was true. I said goodbye to Rebecca, who shook my hand and looked at me with something that had shifted behind her eyes, something that wasn't yet remorse but was at least the beginning of a reckoning. I drove home. The heater worked fine the whole way. The knee was manageable. I stopped for coffee at the place I always stopped, and I sat in the parking lot for a little while, watching the flat Texas landscape go pale and silver in the winter light. I had not blown anything up. I had not delivered a speech or engineered a humiliation. I had made a phone call, handed over some documents, and told my son a true thing in a kitchen on Christmas morning. These were small actions, but small actions were sometimes the right ones. I had learned that much from 40 years of building something nobody could see from the outside. Carl had taken good care of the horses. I found him sitting on my porch when I got back, drinking coffee from a thermos and looking entirely unbothered by the cold. "How was Dallas?" he asked. "Fine," I said. "Family good?" I sat down in the other chair and poured myself a cup from his thermos without asking, which was the kind of thing you can do after 31 years. "Getting there," I said. He nodded and we sat there for a while watching the horses in the far field, their breath coming in small clouds in the cold air, everything quiet and wide and known. And I thought that this, right here, was what I had actually been driving toward for 4 hours on a cold December morning. Not the house with the black shutters and the Range Rover in the driveway. Not the vindication in Richard Harmon's expression or the paperwork in Gerald's desk. Just this. The horses and the cold and a cup of bad coffee and a neighbor who knew better than to say anything more. My phone buzzed. A text from Lily. "Driving back to Charlotte. Love you, Pa. Merry Christmas." I texted back. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Drive safe." Then one from Cooper, which was mostly emojis but included a photo of the Lego set. 3 new sections completed. I was still smiling at that when Daniel called. I let it ring twice, then picked up. "Dad," he said. "Yeah." I talked to Rebecca. A pause. Long enough to mean something. It was a hard conversation. Those are usually the important ones, I said. She didn't know. About the trust. About any of it. Another pause. She thought she did know. She thought she had the whole picture. Most people think that, I said. She was embarrassed. She is embarrassed. He stopped. I'm not making excuses for her. I didn't ask you to. I just want you to know that what you heard, that's not how she actually thinks about you. I think she thought she was being funny. I think she was performing for her friends. I'm not defending it. He stopped again. Daniel, I said. It's Christmas. Let it be Christmas. He exhaled. Yeah. Then, can we come to the ranch in the spring? Cooper's been asking about the horses for 2 years. Cooper can come whenever he wants, I said. You all can. Okay. A third pause, softer than the others. Thanks, Dad. For all of it. I don't think I've said that enough. No, I agreed pleasantly. You haven't. He laughed, which was good. The laugh sounded like him, the real him, the one I knew before life got complicated and expensive and full of other people's opinions. We hung up. I sat on the porch until the cold made the knee protest too loudly to ignore. Then I went inside and made dinner and fed the horses one more time and went to bed early. Outside, the wind was moving through the dry grass in long, quiet waves, the kind of sound that has been the same for 100 years on this land, and will be the same 100 years from now, long after all of us are finished needing to prove anything to anyone. I slept better than I had in months.